Welcome to an introduction to evidence-based undergraduate STEM teaching. I'm Trina McMahon. I'm a professor of civil and environmental engineering and of bacteriology here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm also co-faculty director of the Delta program, which is a program here on campus to prepare future faculty to be effective teachers. I teach a variety of courses myself. I teach an introduction to engineering for the freshman level. I also teach a sophomore junior level course on environmental engineering, which is my specialty. And I teach an introduction to biology for honors students.
And I'm Derek Bruff. I'm the director of the Center for Teaching at Vanderbilt University. I'm also a senior lecturer in mathematics there, where I teach such courses as linear algebra and statistics and a really fun course on cryptography. At the Center for Teaching, my colleagues and I work with faculty and graduate students and help them to develop foundational teaching skills as well as explore new ideas in teaching and learning. Let's unpack this course title a little bit, An Introduction to Evidence-Based STEM Teaching. STEM, the acronym, stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, which is a very common grouping of disciplines that have kind of a similar way of approaching the world and definitely have a lot of commonalities when it comes to teaching. And those are the disciplines we're going to be focusing on in this course.
We are focused on undergraduate teaching. Many of the principles and techniques that we'll talk about would also apply at the high school level or in graduate school. But really what we're going to be talking about mainly is undergraduate teaching and learning in the United States.
So what does evidence-based mean? Well, let's take an example of a recent study that got a fair amount of attention. There was an article published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Scott Freeman and colleagues. And in this article, they did an analysis of 228 control group studies. Each of these educational research studies compared two classrooms, one in which the teaching method was the kind of traditional lecture method, and in the other classroom, there was some form of active learning happening. So teaching methods where students are asked to engage in activities or discussions, often in groups. They're not just sitting there passively listening to an expert. When they analyzed these 228 control group studies, they found some really interesting things. One of their main findings was that the students in the lecture classrooms were 1.5 times more likely to fail the course than students in the active learning classrooms. The students in the active learning classrooms, about 22% of them across these studies failed those courses. In the lecture classrooms, it was 34%. Another really interesting finding was that when you looked at the final course grades for students in these two different settings, the students in the active learning classrooms, their final course grades were on average 6 points higher on a 100-point scale. So there was a pretty significant impact on student learning. Another kind of interesting fact from this study, a couple of the studies they looked at involved graduate students and more experienced faculty, and they found that first-time graduate instructors who were practicing active learning techniques in their classrooms, their students often did better than the very experienced star lecturers did in their classrooms. So that's some pretty persuasive evidence that active learning can be a very effective technique in the college classroom. Trina, what was your first experience with active learning?
Well, Derek, I'm embarrassed to say that as a graduate student, I wasn't introduced to any of these concepts. I didn't have any course or formal training in how to teach. And during the very first semester that I taught, I fully was bought into the sage on the stage mentality. I prepared lectures that were 50 minutes long and totally bored my students to death. And at the end of that semester, I realized that what I was doing wasn't working, and I went and I took a course through the Delta program here at UW-Madison that's really similar to the course that we're putting together for you. And I developed some in-class activities for my students to work through, and I used them to break up my lectures. So I had 15 minutes of traditional lecture and then paused for the students to work on a problem that was practicing some of the concepts that I had just lectured on. And I did that 2 or 3 times during the lecture, and it was actually a very simple way to bring the energy level up in the class and to just get the students more engaged in the overall process. And I noticed such an improvement in the way that my teaching led the students towards those learning objectives, towards those learning gains that I had set out for the course, that I totally bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And ever since then, I've been using active learning practices in my classroom, as well as a lot of the other techniques and principles that we're going to talk about in this course.
So for me, I didn't have a course like this either. I did have a pretty formative experience at one point as a graduate student, though. The Vanderbilt Physics Department had brought in Harvard physics professor Eric Mazur, and he gave a talk on a teaching method that he calls peer instruction. And so it kind of goes a little bit like this. He'll throw out an interesting question to his students, usually something conceptual in nature, often a multiple choice question. Have the students think about the question individually, and then pair up and discuss it, kind of put their heads together and see if they can come up with a solution. He typically uses a classroom response system of some kind, so students are able to respond A, B, C, or D, and then he gets a bar graph at the front of the room showing the distribution of student responses. Then you can use that bar graph to kind of guide a whole class discussion afterwards, getting the students to dig into the reasons for and against each answer, and kind of coming to the point where a lot of the students have mastered the concept. When I first heard Eric Mazur talk about that method, I thought that's exactly the kind of classroom interactions I want to have in my teaching. And so I started using it that very semester in my calculus courses that I was teaching as a graduate student. And really, I've been using it ever since. I mean, it's a core tool in my teaching toolbox that I can adapt and use in a lot of different ways.
We actually have a lot of choices as teachers that we have to make when we're crafting a class. We have to develop in-class activities, out-of-class activities. We have to find ways to link lectures and labs. We write exams. And we have control over really the all components of the course. And there's really no reason why we have to just depend on anecdotal information or our past experiences in order to do that, to make those choices. We can actually use research and evidence to design our course. And this is a really fundamental concept that we'll be calling on a lot throughout this course. The idea that we can use evidence garnered from primary literature, but then also from our own past experiences to make these decisions about how to craft our course.
So in this course, we'll see what the research says about such things as identifying learning objectives for our students, crafting assessments that are meaningful and appropriate to our courses. Also, we'll look at a lot of evidence around different learning activities. So things like peer instruction, but also problem-based learning, inquiry-based labs, cooperative learning strategies of different kinds. We'll also spend some time looking at what's sometimes called the affective domain. Things like student motivation and creating an inclusive classroom climate where all students feel comfortable fully participating. At the end of the course, you'll have a chance to pull all those ideas together in a final assignment. We're going to ask you to draft an annotated lesson plan in which you take what you've learned and apply it to a teaching context that you pick, so that you really get a chance to dig into these ideas and apply it in a way that's appropriate for you.
So you might be wondering who's putting this course together. Of course, there's Derek and I, but the real heavy lifting is being done by faculty and staff in something called the CERTL network. CERTL stands for the Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning. It's a network, so it's a distributed center, and it's formed by 22 different institutions of higher learning here in the United States, a mixture of public and private institutions. And there are faculty and staff at those institutions whose mission it is to prepare future faculty to be effective teachers. And we're drawing upon that expertise and expertise of people outside the CERTL network as well to put together the materials for this course. Now, the CERTL network has 3 core ideas that are going to permeate the rest of this class. Those ideas are teaching as research, which is, for me, actually one of the most transformative concepts that I've ever been introduced to as a teacher, which is this idea that you can use your teaching as a research project where you have a hypothesis that you want to test and you make measurements about how well your students are achieving their learning gains and iterate on the structure of your course in order to better achieve those learning gains. So we're going to talk a lot about TAR throughout this class. The second core idea is the concept of a learning community. Learning communities actually operate at 2 different scales. The first scale being students in your classroom forming a community that supports its members by interacting and sharing in the process of learning and discovery. And so we're going to talk a lot about how you would facilitate that as an instructor. But you as an instructor belong to a learning community through this MOOC, through your local friends and colleagues that you might be working with as part of this MOOC or as part of learning how to be an effective teacher. So definitely make sure that you buy into this concept of a learning community because it's extremely useful. The third core idea is learning through diversity. And By diversity, we mean the diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and skills that your students bring into the classroom. And CERTL really believes that we can use that diversity to enhance the learning process, to make it a richer experience in the classroom and make all students feel included while they're in your classroom.
So speaking of learning communities, we do want this course to be a learning community. And so we've set up a variety of ways for you to interact both with the content and each other and us. And so we hope you take advantage of them. We'll have a lot of videos for you to watch, exploring some ideas and concepts and some of the research on teaching and learning. Many of those videos will have questions embedded in them for you to think about and respond to help you make sense of what you're learning. We're also hoping we'll have really active discussion forums in this course, and so I encourage you to jump right in there and share your perspectives and ideas. Particularly, I think it'll be interesting to explore how some of these ideas that we're talking about in the course play out in different disciplines and in different types of institutions, and so we hope you'll explore that in the discussion forums. We'll have weekly quizzes that you can use to review core concepts and make sense of them, and we'll also have a few peer-graded activities through the course. These will be a little bit more substantial in that we'll be asking you to submit some work, develop some ideas, and then grade each other's work, give each other feedback on the ideas that you're developing. Also, I would encourage you that if you're not already part of some type of local learning community, of other graduate students, postdocs, faculty on your campus who are taking this course, I'd encourage you to seek that out. Feel free to use the discussion forums to help you find others in this course who are nearby that you might meet up with. I think you'll get a lot more out of the course if you've got some local folks that you can interact with and talk about what you're learning and how it applies to your own teaching. If you do end up facilitating a local learning community for this course, please let us know. We've got some additional resources we can provide to you that will make that a little bit easier for you. We'll have other opportunities for interaction. We're planning to have some virtual Q&A sessions. I know I'll be very active on Twitter during the course, so please do participate, take advantage of these interactive opportunities we've set up for you.
We're really looking forward to getting to know you better and to participating in that learning community with you, so jump right in.